Over the last few months, something unusual has been happening behind the scenes of Social Security and VA benefits. The forecast for next year's cost of living adjustment isn't moving down, it's moving up. Some forecasts have now climbed close to 4%. If that number holds, it could turn into one of the largest increases retirees and veterans have seen in years. But here's the part almost nobody explains: why that number keeps changing, sometimes month to month. Most people only hear about the COLA once, in October, when the official figure is announced. But a small group of analysts tracks it every single month, all year long, quietly updating their models as new economic data comes in. Recently, those updates have been climbing faster than almost anyone expected, and the gap between this year's increase and next year's forecast has grown wider with almost every new report. Today, we're going to walk through why these forecasts jumped, what the latest predictions actually show, what a bigger COLA could mean in real dollars for both Social Security and VA disability compensation, and why none of it is official yet. But before we get to next year's number, you first need to understand why these forecasts keep changing in the first place. Why the forecasts are suddenly rising. Here's the short version. For most of the winter, inflation looked mild, and early forecasts for next year's COLA were modest, some barely above 1%. Then, starting in the spring, gas prices spiked sharply after overseas shipping disruptions rattled global oil markets, jumping more than 20% in a single month. From there, the ripple effects spread into groceries, utilities, and insurance, pushing the numbers higher month after month. Picture someone filling up their car in February, then again in April. Same car, same gas station, noticeably more at the pump both times. That's not a coincidence. It's the exact kind of shift that shows up directly in the inflation measure the government uses to calculate your COLA, something called the CPI-W. You don't need to memorize the name. You just need to know it's the same number driving both your Social Security increase and your VA compensation increase, since federal law ties them together. To be clear, this doesn't guarantee a historically large increase. It simply explains why the forecasts have been climbing rather than sitting still. And this affects veterans just as directly as retirees, since VA disability compensation is tied to that exact same inflation number, dollar for dollar, percentage point for percentage point. But not every analyst is reading that data the same way. Depending on which one you look at, next year's prediction can look meaningfully different. What the latest forecasts are showing, as of the most recent update, in mid-July, the Senior Citizens League, a nonpartisan advocacy group that publishes a new COLA prediction every month, has next year's increase at 3.8%. That's a full percentage point above this year's 2.8% COLA, and it would apply equally to Social Security retirement checks and VA disability compensation. Independent policy analyst Mary Johnson, who tracks the same inflation data separately, currently has her estimate a touch lower, around 3.7%. Earlier in the year, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office weighed in with its own early projection, around 3.1%, and a simpler trend calculation based purely on the most recent months of data currently points to roughly that same figure. Three respected sources, three slightly different ranges. That gap exists because nobody is actually predicting the future. They're all reading the same partial picture, using different models, and reasonably disagreeing about where it leads. None of them are guessing randomly either. Each forecast is built from real, published inflation data, just weighted and interpreted a little differently. These numbers have already moved more than most people realize. Early in the year, some estimates sat as low as the 1% to 2% range. By early summer, as gas prices spiked, Mary Johnson's own forecast climbed all the way to 4.7%, its highest point so far, before easing back down as fuel prices cooled in the weeks since. So if the forecast can swing that much in just a few months, what happens between now and the actual announcement? What could push COLA even higher? A handful of categories will likely decide where next year's number actually lands: energy, groceries, housing, medical costs, and insurance. Here's what that could look like in real life. Imagine paying $60 more a month for groceries than you did last year. Then another $30 for electricity. Then your homeowner's or auto insurance renews. And it's gone up again too. Maybe a prescription copay creeps up on top of all of it. None of those feels dramatic on its own. But add them together across a household, month after month, and that's exactly the kind of pressure that pushes next year's COLA and next year's VA compensation increase higher. Housing and medical costs deserve particular attention here, because unlike gas prices, they rarely reverse quickly once they climb. A spike at the pump can ease within a few months. Rent, insurance, and healthcare costs tend to stay elevated for years after they rise. If those costs keep climbing through the summer, the COLA will likely climb with them. But here's the balance worth sitting with. A bigger COLA is not automatically good news. It exists because the price of everyday life went up. A larger check often just means a larger check chasing a larger set of bills. On top of that, a meaningful share of any COLA increase for retirees on Medicare gets absorbed by rising Part B premiums, which are usually deducted straight from the check before it ever reaches your account. So even if next year's increase ends up larger than this year's, there's another question almost every retiree and veteran eventually asks. What a bigger COLA really means for your check, let's put this in dollars. Because dollars are what actually show up in your account, not percentages. At the current 3.8% estimate, someone receiving $1,500 a month would see about $57 more per month, or roughly $680 more over the year. Someone receiving $2,000 a month would see about $76 more per month, or close to $900 over the year. Someone receiving $3,000 a month would see about $114 more per month, or nearly $1,370 over the year. Same percentage, very different totals, depending on what you're already receiving. This applies broadly. Social Security retirement benefits, SSDI, and survivor benefits all receive it. And by law, VA disability compensation receives the exact same percentage increase as Social Security in the same year. Whether you're a 100% rated veteran or receiving a smaller monthly amount for a lower rating, a veteran receiving $3,000 a month in combined compensation would see roughly the same $114 a month bump as a retiree receiving the same amount through Social Security. Military retired pay follows the same schedule as well. None of this requires any action on your part. There's no application for veterans to file, no enrollment for retirees, and no paperwork for survivors. If a final number is confirmed, the adjustment happens automatically, and the new amount simply shows up starting in January. But none of these dollar figures are final yet. And that's actually the most important part of this entire story. Why October is the date that really matters. Here's what's frustrating about everything you've just heard. Every number in this video, the 3.8%, the 3.7%, the $900, all of it, could still change before it becomes real. That's because, by law, the official COLA isn't calculated from this spring's data or this summer's headlines. It only uses inflation numbers from July, August, and September, compared against the same 3 months last year. Every forecast you hear before October, including the ones in this video, is built on an incomplete picture. That's not a flaw in the reporting. It's simply how the law was written decades ago. And nothing about that changes no matter how confident a headline sounds. That's exactly why the number has already moved so much this year, from as low as 1% in the winter, up to 4.7% by early summer, and back down into the high 3% range since. If it shifts again next month for Social Security or for VA compensation, that's not a red flag. It's simply how forecasting works when the real data isn't finished yet. Practically, that means don't build next year's budget around any single forecast you see this summer. Treat each monthly update as a snapshot, not a promise. The number that actually determines your check won't exist until September's data is published in October. So, What should you actually do between now and then? Between now and October, the most useful thing you can do is stay informed. Watch the monthly updates, and be cautious of any headline claiming next year's exact number is already locked in. It isn't. If current trends hold, next year's adjustment could end up meaningfully larger than many retirees and veterans expected. But the real answer still depends on what inflation does over the next few months, which is exactly why it's worth checking back as new data comes in, rather than trusting whichever number happens to go viral first.